Hey guys, I want to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about the overall research process and the research proposal that's due later in the semester. I think we got a little bit of confusion about exactly what we're doing here in this class, so I thought I would take some time and we'll clarify some of that. Um, so when we think about our research project, um, this class, and you guys probably remember me saying this back in the introductory videos at the beginning of the class, but um, this class is designed to help you build toward that research proposal. So all these assignments and discussions and that kind of thing are helping you build the portions of your research proposal. So if you haven't done so yet, please go under the major assignments tab, which is right under the modules, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look under there, and you click on through on the research proposal folder, and has all information about the research proposal. Now this is the final assignment. This is the culmination of your learning that you'll be completing. There's also a information sheet attached to that assignment, and it's also on the overview that helps to outline each section of the research proposal and what should be contained within that section. So if you look at that, you can kind of see where some of the assignments we've been doing kind of correlate with that. If you guys remember the research or problem statement research question assignment that you guys did, and you resubmitted it until we got it right, that assignment is essentially helping you not only develop your research question, but also the introduction to your paper. So if you read it, look at that section, it really correlates, okay? And the discussion that you did in Module 4 that talks about instrumentation, it helps you get to start thinking about how you're going to use instruments to measure your dependent variable. So that it all kind of marries in there. So be sure to kind of see the bigger picture here and understand how it all fits together. And with that said, I think we have a little bit of a misconception about what research is as a whole in this class, okay? So I know a lot of times when we think about research, we think about gathering information, right? We're just trying to get as much information as we can about a topic. Well, that's how we do research as far as like we're looking at the literature, we're researching all these things. But that's not exactly what we're looking at in this class. Research in this class is more than gathering information. This is actually conducting a experiment. Well, really planning to conduct an experiment, because you won't actually conduct the experiment. The proposal is just what it is, a proposed idea for research. This is an actual experiment that would be conducted. You're testing a theory. Your theory is your research question. So that's why your research question was so important. That's why we did that over and over again until we got it right, was because that research question is super important. That's your theory that you think is correct, and you will be testing that based on the structure of your research project. Okay. Now, if you are struggling with your research question, a lot of times we find that once you get a little bit further into the process that research question is not really going to work. But if that happens, just contact me and we'll work through it. A lot of times we can just switch it. We can change it over to something else that might work a little bit better, okay? So don't panic if you're having trouble with your research question, okay? So when we're thinking about a research question, and this is where we kind of got hung up a little bit, was thinking about it in terms of independent and dependent variable. A lot of times in research we think about these big experiments, like these big clinical trials or big scientific experiments you hear about on the news. Well, research can be that, but a lot of times it can be a lot simpler. We have single subject and group design. Those big projects you hear about, those big clinical trials with hundreds of people in them, or those big research projects, those are group design, right? Because you're looking at a subset of people. A single subject may just be one person. And as a social worker, especially in a rural environment, you might find that is an effective method for you. If you may have one client with a particular diagnosis or issue, and you might want to test to see if the intervention that you have planned for them works. So we would gather a baseline data to determine what the behavior looks like, and then we do the intervention and see if there's a difference, right? So keep in mind, there are different scales to this. It doesn't always have to be a huge idea or a huge groundbreaking discovery kind of thing. It can, a lot of research is replication, seeing what other people have done and doing it again, maybe in a different population, or just repeating it exactly. That helps to to understand if it really truly is effective. Was it a fluke the first time, or does it work consistently among researchers? And that's how we gather more information. That's how we become more informed and evidence-based, because we are an evidence-based practice. Okay, so when we think about it in terms of independent and dependent variables, we're looking at a dependent variable, which may be a behavior. A lot of times in social work, it is a behavior. So it might be behavior that you're trying to increase or decrease, maybe with your client or clients. Okay, then we know that's a behavior is an issue. Okay, so then we have an intervention that we decide that may be helpful to that. The intervention or your independent variable that may help make a change to that dependent variable, that behavior. So you have to be able to accurately measure your dependent variable, that is your behavior, to determine if the independent makes a change on it. Okay, so that's why this Module 4 discussion was so important. It was helping to get you to start thinking about, how do I measure that behavior? How do I measure that dependent variable? So what is your dependent variable in your research study? Think about it, and how would you measure that? How are you going to measure to see if any change happened with it? How are you going to make sure that you can tell that? And that's where instrumentation comes along. That's a fancy way of saying just measuring. That's the mechanism we use to measure. So say you're looking at anxiety. Anxiety is your behavior, generalized anxiety disorder, and you want to provide an intervention to determine if it makes a change to your anxiety. Well, how are you going to measure that anxiety? We want to get a baseline to determine what the anxiety looks like without any intervention. But what kind of instrument would you use for that? Would you use an existing measure that's like an anxiety inventory? Something that you use already in your own practice, maybe something that you use to measure, and you do it at certain periods of time to just see how often change is made. And then when you introduce your intervention, you continue to measure in the same fashion. That way you get an apples to apples comparison of, okay, this is what it was like before we did anything, and this is what it was like after we did an intervention. Okay. And you have to think about how long you want your project to be, right? So another topic that we covered was qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods. So I think there was a little bit of confusion about folks determining whether their research was quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative is more numbers based. You want to, like in my example about anxiety, if I'm using like an anxiety inventory, or some kind of existing instrument to measure, like a little survey, that you fill out with your client. If we're looking at that, something like that, and then we're trying to measure the change in it, it would be numbers based, right? So you could see that the scores that existed before and the scores that existed during the intervention, and you could average it out and you could look at it statistically. Okay, so that would be a quantitative measure. Okay, so it's very statistical. Okay, now quantitative is less statistical. While it can be analyzed with numbers, qualitative is more experiential based. It's like a satisfaction, like what the survey, if they're open-ended responses, that's a qualitative measure. If you're in focus groups and trying to get information, again, a qualitative measure. Okay, so those things are a little bit more experiential based rather than actual just numbers. Okay, mixed methods is just a combination of the two. Some of you, I think, will be doing that. You'll have a combination of people giving information about their experiences while also looking at responses, or maybe like figures, or participation in the programs, or whatever. So keep that stuff in mind when you're looking at your research proposal, okay? And we just spent a lot of time, the Tuskegee paper helped us look at ethics, research ethics, so we understand what we can and cannot do from an ethical perspective in research. So keep that in mind when you're developing your research proposal. And, looking real closely about measurements. Now, research is all about planning. You have to really plan ahead and think 2 or 3 steps ahead. And you're thinking about your topic, your research question. Well, how would I actually measure that, if I were going to look at it and actually do the study, how would I make that happen? How would I show that, in my paper? Because in your sections of your research proposal, you're going to have to talk about that in great detail. You're going to have to show how you have thought this through, because that's what we see in the literature. And if you're unfamiliar with some of the ways the research proposals may be formatted, if you look at some research, just any kind of research in the databases, you can see how they've kind of done the same things. They provide a literature, overall problem statements, and they have a literature review, research questions. They have a methodology section that talks about what kind of instrumentation, how they're measuring that dependent variable, how is it designed, identifying, what kind of research design you're using. Talk about the participants. You have to give like a little profile of the participants from a demographic profile without any identifiable information. How you will deal with reliability and validity, because we want to make sure that we're looking at just this one thing. If we're looking at, like, for example, if you were looking at sleep, what's your behavior? Well, and you want to see if this particular intervention will help your sleep, well, or help a group of people sleep. How can you make sure that it's really this having the effect on sleep? What other things are going on in that person's life that could affect their sleep or may affect their sleep? So you got to think about all those external factors that have an impact on your study, right? So, and you have to talk about how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to analyze the data, and how will you look at it to determine if you have this data about baseline and intervention periods, and how you're going to show that was effective or not. So just planning and thinking ahead. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about this project. So I hope this helps clarify a little bit as to what we're looking at from a big picture standpoint here. Because this is all meant to fit together. So you kind of have to think of this research mindset that you're planning ahead. How will this actually be done? Because even in your methods section, you need to talk about it specifically. You need to address exactly how you'll accomplish this, how you'll look at it, how long is your research study going to be? How often are you going to, measure the behavior? What type of research design? All these things. So just keep that in mind. And don't get overwhelmed by it. We're doing it piece by piece. We will move along in the process. So the instrumentation, just the module 4 that talked about instrumentation was just to kind of get you to start thinking about, how am I going to measure this? How am I going to measure that dependent variable? How am I going to do that? And as we move along in Module 5 and do the next discussion, we're going to talk more about a research question and what research design you're going to be using. I know we're talking about, we've talked this week's content, or this 2-week module's content in Chapter 12 and 13 will talk about single subject and group design, just like I mentioned earlier in the video. So, and who are your participants? What are they like? Who are they in general in the group or in the individual? And how will you obtain the sample? How would you logistically do this? Okay, so we're getting there. We're slowly getting there. So this is kind of helping you develop that method section. There's also a really good video on quantitative versus qualitative data in the module this week. So I think that'll help clarify some of the, the issues with that. So hopefully this and that information will help you, move forward with that. And then, next week or the next module, and I'm going to try to open them up a little bit early for you, so you can go ahead and work ahead if you want to. We're going to talk about data collection and data analysis. So, hopefully that'll help clear up some issues with those sections. So, but I encourage you, please look ahead and look at the research proposal, the requirements for the research proposal, because that will definitely help you kind of understand what the expectation is. As always, you guys reach out anytime. Let me know if you have questions. If you're not sure and you want to talk about your particular project, let me know. I try to meet with you anytime. I'm here 8 to 4 during the day in my office, but if you need to meet later, I can do them at night, on the weekends. Whatever works for you guys, you just let me know, okay? So let me know if you have questions. So you guys take care.